The next thing I want to talk about is going to be combat, and particularly spells, because that's a lot more involved. This is probably going to be the most complex part, and it's a little difficult to describe without, being in action, but just kind of bear with me, I guess. It makes a lot more sense when you're actually doing it. This might be a little confusing, but hopefully it won't be that bad. So we're back on my character sheet for my Nature Domain Cleric, and this is my spell list. And so you can see that there are different levels of spells. So here are like my 3rd level spells, I have my 4th level spells, etc. This is based on your level. So at different levels you gain access to different levels of spells. So here I'm going to open up the cleric page and I will show you this little chart. So this is for clerics, and this is also very intimidating to look at. But so here, 1st level, you know 2 1st level spells, and you know 3 cantrips. And cantrips are like your level 0 spells. So these are spells that you can basically just cast as many times as you want. This is not gonna take up any of your spell slots, which is how many times you can cast a spell of that level in one day cycle. Next you have like your 2nd level, and so you know 3 cantrips, and you know 3 1st level spells, and so on. So as you can see, like at 2nd level, you don't know any 2nd level spells. It's not based on, it's not 1-to-1 rather. So when you're level 20, and that takes a long time, you're only gonna know 1 9th level spell. So it only goes up to 9 levels of spells. It's, there aren't 20 levels of spells, and yeah, so that can be a little weird, but I don't know. I like to keep this chart handy, especially when it's getting close to the time when it looks like you're going to level up. And with each of these levels, well, with most of these levels, you get a sort of improvement to something, or you get a new ability, but that's not really here or there. So I'm gonna give myself a long rest because I'm not playing this campaign anymore. And taking a long rest is going to give you back all of your spell slots. So as you can see, I have 4 1st level spell slots. And that's sort of like, every spell slot is like your magical concentration, your ability to cast a spell. So as you can see, like as the spells get higher, or the levels get higher, you can cast less of these spells because they take more of your energy up. So this is like your mana, if you want to think of it like that. But yeah, and then you can see like the cantrips have no requirement, or no spell slots rather. So I'm just gonna sort of, this is very strange to explain, but so every time when you're in combat, every time it's your turn is 1 action. And you can think of a round, like a turn of combat, as being 6 seconds. That's typically what people go with. Some people say it's more or less. But so it's only like what you can do in like just a second. So like combat takes a long time, but it's adding up to, a fight that would be just like the length of a fight that you might see in like a movie. So you can see here all of these that say like 1A, that's 1 action. But then you have things that are like 1 minute. So if you pick something that's like 1 minute, then you're going to want to cast that outside of combat. Because if you cast it in combat, That's 6 seconds a turn, 1 minute, and it's going to take 10 rounds of combat. So you should keep these things in mind. But then you might also have something like this, one reaction. So a reaction is if someone makes a move to attack you or something happens, it will be specified in the spell here. And you can see, so for Featherfall, reaction, which you take when a creature within 60 feet of you falls. So Featherfall makes you fall more slowly, as the name implies. So this is not a combat spell, but it's still going to take a spell slot, but you don't have to, like, take an action to cast it. And then you also have something like one bonus action. So bonus actions can be a little... it depends on who you're asking. So for the most part, I think the general rule is if you're using a bonus action, then your primary action needs to be, like, your primary spell that you're casting needs to be like a first level spell. But that is different for some people. It's not necessarily the case. But again, you need to ask your game master about these things. You also can see here, so like guidance has a little like diamond shape with a C in it. And that means it's like it's a concentration spell. So a concentration spell means that you need to focus on this spell to keep it going. And so you can see here it says concentration up to 1 minute. So while this spell is active, until the maximum time is up, you need to be concentrating on it. So you can still cast spells and you can still make attacks and do actions and things like that, but you can't cast a second concentration spell while one is active, and anytime you take damage, you have to roll to keep your concentration. So if you fail the check to keep your concentration after keeping damage, then that spell isn't active anymore because you lose your concentration. And these spells can be really helpful. They're usually pretty strong for the most part. Sometimes they're not, but I feel like most concentration spells are pretty strong. And the other little tag you might see on something is this little book shape with an R in it. And that means it's a ritual. And so ritual spells are also kind of non-combat, but you can use them in combat if you really want. But the so here, casting time, 1 action. It can just take 1 action. You can say, I'm going to speak with animals right now. I cast it on myself. 1 action. But it has this ritual tag. And so if you want, you can cast it as a ritual. And that means it won't take a spell slot, but it takes 10 minutes to cast. And that's not like a blanket statement. If you have a spell that already takes 10 minutes to cast and it's a ritual tag and you choose to cast it as a ritual, it will take 1 hour to cast. So you really have to sort of, you have to make this decision carefully. But again, you can just say like, no, I'm going to bite the bullet. I'm going to cast it as an action. I'm going to use a spell slot for that. So yeah, that's kind of the weird things that you can have happen. So I'll show, let's look at Sacred Flame. That will probably be, well, wait. No, actually, we're gonna look at, let's look at, this is Firebolt, but I renamed it Forest Fire because it better fit my character. So this is a wizard cantrip, and this is because I took 1 level in wizard. So let's say I am going to cast this. First of all, it's a cantrip, so I can just go ahead and do it. First thing I'm going to want to do is roll the dice. And I brought up, yes, okay. So these are the dice that you're going to be using. They might not look like this, but each of these is, different sided. So this one in the middle, the one with the triangle faces, that's your D20, and that's going to be the one that you use more often than almost any other die. So when you're in combat, you say, I want to cast Firebolt, rather. Then if you meet the conditions, you're within 120 feet of your target. Then you roll your d20. And then, so since so you can see up here, I have my modifiers, my wizard and my cleric. And so I have +2 to intelligence. So let's say I rolled a 16 when I was trying to attack with Firebolt. Then I get to add +2 to that roll. So that makes it an 18. So that just, is saying that I'm good at this, or, and it is just something I know how to do, and so I can do it pretty well. So that can be really helpful. So like if you have somebody, or if you have like an enemy that has like an armor class of like 10, and you roll like a 10, but then you have your modifier +2, and you roll the 12, and then you hit them. So, you should just always make sure to include your modifier. I, for a while, wasn't when I was playing for the first time, and it was very frustrating because I would always miss, but, you just have to remember to add your modifier. And you can also see here that I have a bonus because of my +6 to wizard spells. So let's say I hit, okay? Then I roll the damage dice, and that's a d10 in this case. But you can see that it increases at these different level milestones, so that's 5, 11, and 17. And I'm level 12 in this case, so it's going to be 3d10. So let's say I roll 15 damage. You're usually going to end up at the average of those numbers. So like if 30 is the maximum, you're probably going to end up rolling around 15. So don't feel bad if you don't roll 30. It's going to be very rare that you roll 30. But so let's say I rolled 15 damage. I get to add +6 because that's my wizard spell attack modifier. So that means I do 21 damage, and that's great. The last thing we have is these notes here, the V/S, and we have verbal and somatic in this case. So verbal is exactly what it sounds like. It means you need to be able to speak to cast this spell. So if you're underwater and you can't breathe underwater, then you're not going to be able to cast this spell. Well, actually, I think that you can, it's just that you're going to die faster in that case, so it's just not recommended. And then you have somatic, and somatic is using your hands. So you need to have, and this is something that can be very particular with rules as well. Basically, you need to be able to like move your hands. So if you're restrained, then you can't cast a spell that has a somatic component requirement. But each spellcaster has there's a third note that you can end up with. So like let's look at animal friendship here. You have M, which is material, and in this case the material is a morsel of food. So each spellcaster has I don't know if all of them have this, but I know that clerics have it at least, and most spellcasters do. But it's if you have your spell focus. So like for clerics, that can be like a cross or like an amulet or something like that, and you can use this in place of the material required. The exception to this is, so let's look at Revivify. And this isn't the only one, but so if the material component says which the spell consumes at the end, you need to have that material. You can't use your focus instead of that. And you can see here it's like it has also like a cost requirement, which is worth 300 gold pieces. So you need to have that. There's not really any way around that. It's just, that's it. You just have to do that. Each spell also, for the most part, has a range like 120 feet. But different feats can change that. So like for example, Spell Sniper is a feat that doubles the range of your spells. So like this would be like 240 feet. You have your effect. And so this just basically tells you like the sort of thing that it does, like the class that it falls under. So we have like healing, we have creation, we have buff, and then we have like these which show like this shows the amount of damage dice that you're going to be rolling, and it also shows the elemental effect. So you have things that will be resistant to fire or ice or whatever the element may be, or they might be weak to it, and so depending on what their resistance or defense is to it, then you may do extra or you might do nothing at all. And so yeah, let me just show you really quick. So like, let's say I cast this, you can see that over here, D&D Beyond will keep track of that. So every time you cast a spell at a certain level, then you use up one of those slots. And you have to, once like, they're all filled, then you can't cast anymore. So the way to get your spell slots back is, the easiest way is to take a long rest, and that's a full night of sleep. It's 8 hours of sleep, but there are exceptions depending on racial abilities. For example, elves don't need to sleep, they only need to meditate for 4 hours to regain all of their it acts like a full night of sleep. But I believe wizards can also take a short rest, so that's 1 hour of rest or relaxation, light reading, things like that. And they can regain a certain number of spell slots. But yeah, I mean it's pretty easy. Oh, one more thing I should probably touch on. So, like I was saying, with casting a spell, you'll have, your traditional sort of spell where you have to roll your d20 to determine whether you hit or not, but there's another kind of spell that you can do, and I think they just call this like a saving throw spell. So like, here we have Sacred Flame. Sacred Flame, okay, so it forces the thing that you cast it on to make a saving throw. And saving throws mean that there's like a certain number you have to beat or something happens as a consequence. And sometimes, even if you succeed, you will still take a consequence, but it just might be halved or something like that. So let's say that I cast Sacred Flame, and you can see that the save is Dex 16. So that means whoever I cast it on has to make a roll, and then they add their dexterity, or subtract their dexterity, as the case may be. And if they roll below a 16, then they have to take 1d8 radiant damage, or, since I'm level 12, 3d8 radiant damage. So that's very good, because that means that you don't have to make that success roll. And if you are suffering some sort of condition that might make you like subtract from your attack rolls, then spells like this can be extremely useful, because you don't have to take that that debuff into account. You still have just as good a chance of hitting, if not better in some cases. So like if I rolled, or if I had a spell that had a wisdom saving throw or an intelligence saving throw, and I was fighting against like an undead or like a thrall or something like that, some kind of zombie creature that has really low intelligence, then they're probably not going to beat it. It would take a critical success probably for them to succeed at that roll. So that can be really good depending on the scenario. And actions, so you have your actions, which are like your attacks, and they can be, they just depend on the equipment that you have. And that's, attacks are a lot simpler than spells in that case. For the most part, you just need to be in range, and you have the same sort of like bonus that you might have, and then you have your base damage that you roll after making your roll to attack. There are, I believe, 3 different types of damage that you're going to have with a non-magical weapon, and that's piercing, and I think I have bludgeoning here, and, well, I don't have any, but it's slashing. And so different enemies can also be resistant or weak to those types of damage as well. So like if you have something with like really heavy armor, bludgeoning is going to be your best bet. Piercing is not going to be the best, but it depends. You have also your unarmed strike. Every single character has one of these, and like it says here, it's bludgeoning damage equal to 1 plus your strength modifier. So in this case, it's 1 plus my strength modifier, which is also 1. So I can only do 2 unarmed damage. So this is, if you're a monk, this is going to be a better form of attack, because you're going to have a much higher bonus to your unarmed strikes. But this is something that is mostly good for like out of combat situations, like brawling someone. And the last note I just want to make really quick in terms of attacks and magic and weaponry is that I don't think there's an exception to this, but any attack can be specified to be non-lethal. So if you say, I want to so I guess you'd roll your attack, and then when you roll your damage, you say, I want to do non-lethal damage. So if you don't want to kill someone, then you need to specify that so that it, can be noted that you're like, okay, well, I'm just gonna like, I'm gonna punch them in like the chest. I'm not gonna like punch them in the nose. I'm gonna cut at their arms. I'm not gonna like stab at their heart. And even spells can be specified as non-lethal. It's just, so just, I guess, keep that in mind. It's always an option. And in that case, when you get them down to what would be a knockout, it's just, or rather, incapacitated, then it's going to just be them being knocked out. But yeah, again, there's a lot of stuff to learn with combat and with spells and weapons and stuff like that. So it can be a little intimidating, but it's much, much easier when you actually have it in context, and it will be a lot easier to learn when you actually have like a hands-on experience with it. So that's all for this. And we'll see what I do next.